Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. It's another Breeders Cup preview. We are looking at the toughest race of the Breeders' Cup weekend, in my opinion at least. That is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. It's the second race of the Breeders' Cup slate in general. It is the second of 5 on Friday. It is the 7th race on the 10-race Keeneland card. It is a tricky group of 14. None of these fillies have stood out over the last 2 months. None of them have separated themselves, which makes for an interesting preview and makes for a near hellish race to choose. So let's dive into the first of 14. It's a big field as well, so we could talk about it for as long as we can. Even better. Vegas Magic is the one. Ships in from Southern California for Doug O'Neill, a filly who started her career off 3 for 3. Broke her maiden nicely, rattled off 2 stakes wins, including a nice win in the Grade 2 Sorrento at 14-1. Next out in the Del Mar Debutante, no factor when chasing in Tell Me Nolies home, beaten 12 lengths there. Just never fired. That was really it. Looking at her from a pedigree standpoint, some stamina on that top side from Good Magic. The dam side, however, mainly sprints. So this is a tough spot in general to get out to 2 turns for the first time. And when you factor in that pedigree, there's really just not much to her. So it's a tough field. You could really see anybody jumping up and winning this. Don't think this is the one. I think when I go through the 14 horses in here, she is probably the 14th best in the field. The 2 is You're My Girl. New York bred filly, broke her maiden by 14.5 on debut at Saratoga, stretched out to the mile from 3/4 in start number 2 in the Grade 1 Frisette. Set the pace there, was a bit heady in there, still stuck around, only lost by a length to Chocolate Gelato. And she showed some good battling qualities. I was very impressed with her ability to fight there. The knock, however, is she got overhauled by Chocolate Gelato, and there seems like there could be some other pace pressures in this field. Most notably the 9, Grand Love. If Wonder Wheel gets sucked in, that could be a problem. So I think that's where the big disadvantage comes from. I don't think the distance is going to hurt her at all, though. I think 2 turns is well within her wheelhouse, especially a short stretch 2 turns like we get going a mile and a 16th at Keeneland. So if they let her go for some reason, which I, once again, don't think happens, but if they do, that's where she can be a player. And maybe you draw it up differently. Maybe you could see her being a little bit more alone on the lead. And if that's the case, she plays, especially to maybe even just hit the board. The 3 and Tell Me Nolies. I feel like this horse is getting a little wise guide. Maybe wise guide's not even the right word. She's getting a lot of love when I look around, and that's because she has strung together wins in a race where not many can say the same, and that goes a long way. She's won 3 in a row. Not flashy, she's not sexy, but she gets the job done, and that's where she kind of separates herself, and I think people keep looking to her and say, well, the figure is good, not really. I mean, is she visually the most impressive? No, but she wins. So certainly a big positive. She wins. Like I said, 3 straight wins, neck maiden victory, head victory in the Del Mar Debutante. Best career run by far in the Chandelier last time out. Good Grade 2 victory. She kind of bobbled at the break, came from off the pace, rallied nicely, picked up the pieces well. She didn't beat anything. I mean, she hasn't beaten anything of quality to this point, which certainly does make her look a lot worse than some of the others, because I think you can at least say, hey, they beat horses that are here. She hasn't beaten really anybody of quality that also shows up in this race. So that's a big knock, but she just knows how to win, and that's always a great and admirable quality. She can make her pace, or make her race, I should say, if she needs to. So there's things to like about Tell Me Nolies. Absolutely. Just the question of the competition, and can she take the step forward against this level of competition, which isn't great, but it's still better than what she's been facing in California. That's what she has to answer. The 4 is Sabra Tuff. Sabra Tuff, she's almost a filly you want to pick in this race because there's nothing that really stands out. She broke her maiden and then has lost 4 straight races since. She placed in a couple of them, including one behind Wonder Wheel in career start number 2 when she was second, but she's just never there. I mean, she's always been she's been beaten by 6 and change lengths in 3 of her 4 stakes appearances. So that kind of tells you all you need to know. I did think it was impressive. She did pick up quite well in the Alcibiades last time out. She came from well out of it, second last from an outside post, and she finished 5th, and she was picking off horses late. I mean, the top 4 just kind of separated themselves in there through favorable fractions, and she did the rest. But it was still beating 6.5 lengths. It's not like the race sets up much different than there. So it would just take a massive performance here 2 factor. But one thing I do find interesting is that that was a best figure. No one is really separating themselves from that perspective in this field. So there's somehow positives with a horse who has been fifth, beaten 6.5 lengths in our 2 Grade 1 appearances. But that's where we are with this race. And I could certainly see a case being made for Sabra Tuff on the angle that she closed pretty well over this track last time out. The 5 is Wonder Wheel. She won that Alcibiades. That's a race full reference a few more times. Sabra Tuff, of course, being one. The 2 and 3 across the line for official finisher are also in this race. But Wonder Wheel, 3 for 4 lifetime. She's another one who's just put together wins, and you have to like it. She won her first 2 starts impressively, including that win in the debutante at Churchill. Then lost the Spinaway, and that's the race that definitely throws me for a loop, because she had every chance in the world to Leave No Trace in there, and she just didn't. She just wouldn't go by her. Leave No Trace just outfinished her. And maybe it's because Leave No Trace might be a better 7 furlong, 6, 7, 8 furlong horse around 1 turn than Wonder Wheel, and Wonder Wheel is a better 2-turn horse. I could easily see that being the case, but still, Wonder Wheel, based off of her 2 performances before then, should have had the talent to win that race. Now she came back, won the Alcibiades, broke well from an inside draw. She had to be sent. And I'll talk about the tactics in a second. She had to be sent. She went and set the pace, and she didn't really get away with one. I think some people might be reading it into, she went wire to wire, there won't be... No, I mean, the fractions were to the point where a leader could be softened up by those, especially a leader without much talent. And when you look at it, it was a weird mixture. If you look at the top finishers in this race of on the pace and off the pace horses, I mean, there really just wasn't a separating factor in that race. So I was impressed by that. I was impressed how she dug down when it was clear Chop and Raging Sea had momentum. And Gallop Outs, listen, they're not the end-all be-all, but it is worth noting Wonder Wheel kept going. She never let Chop get past her, even when Chop had momentum and Raging Sea had momentum. So certainly positives to glean off of. The more I watched the Alcibiades, the better I felt about it. And originally coming out of the race, I felt a lot better about Chop. I felt a lot better about Raging Sea. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Wonder Wheel just took care of business. And that's just what you want to see at the end of the day. So certainly a player, but of course she just, the Spinaway, it's okay, she can lose even on a day where she should be the best horse in the race. And that is obviously a big concern in my eyes. I just hate looking at that Spinaway. It is a huge black eye on what it's otherwise been a very decent resume. I also think she can work out on each trip. I know that she has probably had her 2 best wins on the lead, but she can come from off the pace. And when I say off the pace, I really mean she can sit that second flight trip right in behind those 2 or 3 leaders that could be up there. Like I said, I think You're My Girl, Grand Love are your 2 leaders. I think Gaffleon lets those 2 meet up as they make their way by the stands the first time, and I think she can sit in 3rd or 4th, a length or 2 off the front runner. So I think she can work out the right trip, and that's also another big positive in her corner. The 6, Alma Rosa, Mid-Atlantic shipper, bit of a price, but she's done some decent work. She won her 2nd career start by 10.5 lengths at Colonial, finished 2nd in the sorority, beaten 6 lengths. The winner in there disappointed in her next start to Frizette, but she's a half to Vequist. She's a decent filly in her own right. And then stretching out, or her 2nd start, I should say, stretching out to the mile at Delaware. She won a minor stakes there by 3.25 lengths. It was a very, very good victory. I mean, she's had some good wins, and she's never ran a bad race. So certainly positives for Alma Rosa, but it's the quality and the talent thing. And you go back to the lost 2 back, and it was, transitive property, Vetereo, who won that sorority, then got blasted in the Frizette. So who's to say Alma Rosa is better than any of the fillies from the Frizette? And if you don't hold the fillies from the Frizette in a high light, then there's nothing to it. Alma Rosa isn't also ran in here. That's kind of what I see. I mean, once again, this race is so wide open. A filly that's, 2 wins, 2 seconds in 4 starts, 2 very sharp wins on top of that from a visual perspective. Yeah, it's fair to take the shot if you feel like it. I didn't have that confidence, but those positives go a long way in this race. The 7 is Chop. She's the wise guy horse for sure. I said in Tell Me Nolies, felt like she was getting wise guy. This horse has been wise guy for a month, and for the right reasons. She won her first 2 starts on the grass, won at Ellis, won at Kentucky Downs, and I don't take much from the Kentucky Downs race. The track was a bog. You weren't passing anybody there. And the fillies have not come back to do anything. So that a win was a win, but I don't think there's anything to take from that. The Alcibiades was a huge race, though. She came from off the pace. And like I said, no one benefited either way. It was kind of just talent prevailed in the Alcibiades. One of the rare instances you see that play out on the racetrack. But it was, best horses ran the best race in there, regardless of setup and trip. And she was one of them. She picked up horses really nicely despite having to come from well off the pace. And she finished second. But like I said, the more I looked at the race, she just wasn't passing horses. She passed the horses, but when Wonder Wheel was in her sights and Raging Sea was in her sights, she did not blow them out of the water. She was nose off of Wonder Wheel and only a neck ahead of Raging Sea. And Raging Sea, when you look at where they're at the 3/16ths, she should have been multiple lengths behind Chop Chop. And then once again, Gallop Out, not the biggest factor, but Chop Chop killed her momentum from there. She has not been impressive in putting other horses away. We saw it at Kentucky Downs. Maiden win was by a length and a half, but she probably should have won by more. And the Alcibiades, she really was not a big fan of passing those other horses, so that is a concern to me. But visually, she picked off horses well. She was able to work out a big run despite a disadvantageous trip, doing something new. She'd stalked before. She came from off the pace. I envision more of a mid-pack, 7th or 8th early on in this spot. Overriding theme to this is there's tons of potential, and I think it's fair to glean on it, but more than anything, she needs to get better in this race, and she needs to prove she wants to put horses away. So absolutely a use. She is a use on the talent and the projection alone. Where she does fall short is being a true bona fide win contender, because there are some knocks, I think, to her Alcibiades run. So something to balance here, but she does have that good surface run and certainly tons of good things going for her. The 8 is Atomically. Florida-bred filly. She'll be making her first start for Todd Pletcher after running in Florida bred or side restricted races to this point. However, she has handled those fields very well. You can't deny what she did last time out in the My Dear Girl division. That's kind of the marquee race of that 2-year-old series they run every year. Was going a mile and a 16th, so 2 turns at this distance, and she ran a dynamite race. She settled well, mid-pack, wide trip throughout, picked up when needed, overhauled these horses, and won by about 7 lengths. That backed up a strong maiden win. She's gotten better with distance. Now she has to answer this open company question. And while certainly the wins have been talented, this has not been a series that has necessarily gleaned positive results in the Breeders' Cup. Awesome Feather, of course, you go back 11 years, and or 10 years, or 12 years. Oh my gosh, math is hard. 12 years to an Awesome Feather win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. She was coming at it, but she'd been so dominant in every single start. And this filly won maiden race, or debut, I should say, in a maiden race. Disappointing, but you really never count that race in 2 good ones since. But you do just kind of wonder, was she beating anything, and how good can she stack up against these? It makes sense, though, because the field is beatable. I think, once again, she's along the lines of Chop Chop, where you just have to use it because it is absolutely there. The positives are there, but she still has what feels like 1,000 other questions to answer. So tons of positives. Big negative is quality of competition and just overall first time for this trainer, all these different things. Maybe Jose Pinchin, who had her before, just knew what to do with the filly. Does Todd Pletcher and his system have the same thing? So many things she's going to have to prove, but that's just like everybody else. The 90s Grand Love, one of the sharper maiden winners from Saratoga this summer. She won in late August, beat a pretty solid field of what I thought were good 2-year-old fillies. And then in the Pocahontas, despite really favorable fractions, just backed out. And there was really no rhyme or reason to it. She sat the perfect trip and just couldn't go with the top 2 in there, Fun and Feisty and Shoplifter. And neither of those horses really, Fun and Feisty disappointed in the Alcibiades. Then she wasn't able to do much running at Churchill Downs this past weekend. And then Shoplifter was second. I think Shoplifter's okay, but her resume doesn't stack up. We'll talk about her in a couple horses. So, as good as the maiden win was, Steve Asmussen debuted when, they'll just jump up and win. That's what they do sometimes. And then they bounce when they get to the stakes level. I think, that same card, Echo again, was the Kentucky Derby winner for all of a month, and then he made his second start. So, I don't think Grand Love's much different. I think she's a pace player. I think she forces You're My Girl to work a little hard, and I think that's about it. I don't think she plays at all. I mentioned that Vegas Magic was number 14 in terms of horses that can win this race. I think that Grand Love is 13. Chocolate Gelato's the 10. Morning line favorite, 7-2. Don't know if she goes off favorite because, like I said, I think Chop Chop and Tell Me Nolies have been garnering all the noise in the past week or so, and especially after the draw and people diving into these races. Chocolate Gelato's intriguing, though. for the right reasons. She's a Grade 1 winner. She comes with far and away the best speed figures of the field. I mean, it's not even a question. Her career best was a 92 two-back that towers over this field. No one else is even close. But I believe the closest career, as memory served me correctly, was Grand Love's debut. And we just talked about how Grand Love is really not all that. So, point being, if she can run back to that figure, and I'm not a big figure guy, but nevertheless, if she can run back to that, that's intriguing. So, gotta like that. And then she did win the Frizette. But the Frizette was a regression, 9-point regression on Beyer. That's very telling. And on top of that, visually just did not do the job. Sat a really good off the pace trip, one you like, and she'll be able to sit a really good trip despite the 10 post here in this race. The issue comes where she just got up to talk, You're My Girl, and just kind of grinded along. And You're My Girl and Leave No Trace are not bad horses, but they're not elite. They're not horses that tell you, wow, I really trust this form heading into this race. That's just not the case. And I know one's a Grade 1 winner, and You're My Girl broke her maiden by 14.5, but it's not impressive to have beaten them by, a length and 3 3/4 lengths. So there's that. And also, I just visually wasn't impressed. And I take my, how I view the race visually more so, it takes more precedence than any numbers will. And I just thought she was just slowly grinding out a victory here. So I think my knocks on her are that I was not impressed with the Frizette, and she hasn't really beaten anybody that wows me in this race. I would definitely take what, say, Wonder Wheel beat in the Alcibiades more so than what Chocolate Gelato beat in the Frizette. And that does go a long way for me. I also just don't know if 2 turns is really going to be her forte. Practical Joke has really just not been the best. For one, his runners don't really train on from 2 to 3, and also they're just precocious in those first few starts, sprinting. And then you get them a little bit more ground, and they are not really separating themselves. So 2-turn question is something that she'll also have to answer. So the positives are she's going to be able to sit the right trip. She has the best figures, and she's has the right connections. The negatives are I don't really know if she's beaten all that much, and she showed clear regression visually and from a number standpoint in the Frizette. The 11 is American Rockette. She is a polarizing filly because she broke her maiden incredibly nicely in an off-the-turf event at Saratoga. Looked like she could be a big player in the Grade 1 spinaway. Was if she didn't blow the break where she took off to the outer rail and still somehow ran 4th in there. And then she kind of spun her wheels in the Frizette, and that was concerning. I will say the track was weird that day. We kind of talked about it in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile preview I did. And I think it's today's true here. The track was weird. It was a weird sloppy seal track, and I just don't think she was getting over it well enough. I think a return to fast ground here will definitely benefit her in a big way. And I could see if she can run back to her first 2 starts from a visual perspective, she's interesting. And pedigree-wise, I think it's a bit tricky. There's a weird mix of sprinting and endurance in the dam side. We know American Pharaoh can infuse some stamina on the top side, so I think the distance will be in her wheelhouse. It's still a question you guys to answer. My biggest thing is she takes herself out of races early on, and we know how hard it is to make up a lot of ground at Keeneland. So unless the pace is supersonic and Junior Alvarado gets her to move at the earliest time, that's where I think this hurts her more. I don't care much about the Frizette and the weird performance there because I think it was more surface-based. I care more about the trip she can get, and I just don't think it works out in her favor. If she does, and like I said, it's going to rely. If Junior Alvarado gets her into gear at, say, the 5/8 pole and starts to move her slowly into contention, she'll be a player, as long as she's traveling well, of course. But that's a big if that I don't know if I can bank on. Maybe a backup I use, I don't know. But still trying to figure this race out. It'll be very much a game time decision. But I think if you think that she'll be put in a better position from a tactical standpoint, then you can use her if you think she has the talent from those first 2 starts to be a factor in this Juvenile Fillies. Shoplifter, the 12. Filly I mentioned earlier, I don't think she's crazy, and I don't think any horse in this race is crazy, because I thought the Pocahontas was an okay run. Now, Fun and Feisty is not all that, and this filly really didn't have many excuses, but I thought she navigated traffic well. It felt like she really relished the 2 turns in her first try at it. And her first 3 starts were all right. The debutante was a big disappointment, but she's just kind of always picking up ground late, and I think that's something you do like to see, and I thought she did it well in the Pocahontas. Now, That's not a productive prep ever. I think that's kind of the big reason you ultimately end up tossing her. But I think that the fact she's always picking up ground is definitely an interesting aspect to her game. But she's definitely a couple low. I'm just trying to lay out some of the pros and cons for each and every horse here, because that's fair to do in this race. And I think she has the pro of the distance is going to be her friend here. She showed it at Churchill. She could benefit again, but it's probably a couple low on talent. Leave No Trace is the 13. She won the Frisette, she won the Spinaway, and then was third in the Frisette. And it was interesting. The Spinaway did just kind of jump out of nowhere. Nothing really blew you away about the maiden win in New York Bred Company at Saratoga, or I should say auction restricted company. It's a restricted race, not a state bred race. In that company, so it's obviously a couple low and open maiden there at the Spa, and then in the Spinaway, she sat the perfect trip, held off Wonder Wheel, who had every chance in the world to get by her, and finished the job off. And then you get to the Frisette. I think it's interesting because she ran a credible race there. She was clearly third best, but don't forget, in the charts, at least the footnotes in the chart are not, or the past performances are not telling you this, but she broke through the gate before the race, and for a young 2-year-old filly, that's probably the worst thing that could happen. And she still ran a credible race, in my opinion, over a weird track. So I think there's certainly room for improvement from the Frisette. And she's been consistent, even figures, which I don't really know what to read into that, but she's been consistent, and it fits in here. My thing is the post is not good, and I think she's probably more of a one-turn type. That's what the pedigree suggests. That's what her build suggests. That's what all of her runs have suggested to me. And obviously from an outside post, when you're already maybe facing some distance limitations, I just don't think it really works out for you. So I think she's talented. I just don't think these are the circumstances she can win under. And finally, the 14th, we've made it. Raging Sea. Such a nice filly for Chad Brown. Such a nice filly. I think there's tons of potential for this filly. I just don't know if it's this race, but I'm saying that about everybody, so don't worry. She kind of fits in with everybody else on that aspect. But her debut run was huge. She's a horse who's very well bred for 2 turns. 7/8, that's kind of the good distance to debut your true turn horses at, win or lose. And she handled it well. She sat this beautiful trip in behind these leaders, moved when the seas parted, pun intended, entirely. And then she battled really nicely with the filly of Bill Mott's to the wire. And there's been plenty of winners from that maiden race. And then the Alcibiades came. I thought it was a weird run where she broke, and then I don't know if it was just a filly or if this was Jose Ortiz's interpretation of how she should be ridden, but he put her in the firing line. And to me, she showed enough on debut that she should rate to not be in a line of 6 into the first turn. And then she backed out, but by then I felt like she'd already exerted too much. And then coming into the stretch, she looked like she was kind of putting herself away, but then she battled on really nicely. I was so impressed with what she did in that race because she just kept fighting. And I know she took out Kajira, and that, of course, that worthy of a disqualification, but at the same time, you had to have been impressed with what the filly did. And she only lost by a neck in a race, and she certainly should not be overlooked more so than a Chop, in my opinion, as losers of this race. I thought they ran both big races with some problems. I mean, Raging Sea, I know she initiated the contact, but she did have her back end knocked out from under her, and she still fought on very nicely. So I loved her last run. I thought she was going to be my choice in here, and then she drew the outside, and it matters. Yeah, Keeneland, you cannot lose this ground and expect to be a winner. It's just too hard. And if she can tuck in and sit very far off the pace, that'll be a positive. That'll be a very big positive for her because she can. I think she has the talent and the ability to do that and make up the ground where needed. And that's really the only option from the outside post. It's not like she could be hustled away. But at the same time, you're still losing ground in a race where you're not really separating yourself much from the rest. I mean, you got your chance over this track. You had a pretty okay trip, all things considered, and you weren't able to do it. So how are you going to do better with an outside post against arguably a tougher group? And finally, I think it's really interesting, and I caught myself when looking at this filly and thinking back to other Chad Brown juveniles I've picked, who I picked with the expectation of upside. Now, Good Magic is probably an outlier because he was a maiden. He really needed the 2 turns, and for me, when I went with him in 2017, I was like, well, he's getting the distance he wants now. He's good to go. Whereas the other ones I picked, like Standard Deviation in 2018, Favorable Outcome was my pick of the juvenile turf. I think if we're looking at 2-year-old races in general from the Chad Brown barn, it's always, oh wow, this horse, they want to do this. They've done this. They ran really well. A little better trip. Blah blah blah. They'll get the job done. Yes. That's kind of a recurring theme I see with a lot of these Chad Brown runners, and then they just don't run well. And for Raging Sea, she got her chance to do this, and she ran well. But does that mean that she can be even better this time around? No, especially not with the post position. So I think there's just enough negative to look against her, but I really think she has the talent. I just think there's too many factors, especially the post position, once again, that are going to cause her to struggle in this race. So with that, here's how I'm going to lay this race out. Wonder Wheel is going to be my top choice, very reluctantly. Not much I loved in here. This is a race I basically am punting. I think I'm just going to go with the filly who I thought has done the most work, has the best body of work, and see what she can do. And it's really not a race that I'm intrigued by. But that being said, here's what I will do. I'm going to use her as my top choice, but on my A line, my A horses, my must-uses, I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. So that would be You're My Girl, because we're going to see if she gets away with a lone pace, she could be gone. And Tell Me No Lies, Wonder Wheel, absolute uses. Sabra Tuff, why not? Chop Chop, Atomically, for those projection reasons we mentioned. And then my B line is going to consist of Chocolate Gelato and American Rockette, and maybe Raging Sea as kind of like a C. So the B's would be Chocolate Gelato, American Rockette, because I think, they're logicals, and then the C would be Raging Sea if she can overcome the outside post. So that is a lot of numbers, but that's how I would look at this race. I think you have to go deep in here because nothing is trustworthy. So that's what I'm going to. One more time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 on the A line, 10, 11 B line, and Raging Sea would be a C. So that's how I'm going to look at the juvenile fillies here. It's a very tough race. Good luck to you. If you can if somebody can go out there, single a horse, and they get home, please send it to me. To me, you're the greatest handicapper out there, and full respect if you're able to do that. Fun race, excited to watch it because it feels like it could be chaotic. And we'll see you next time on what will definitely be a little bit more of a zen, mundane Breeders' Cup preview.